Island Guano Company had returned to find his island occupied by the Japanese. Took the Japanese warship, end quote, and to avoid in every way possible any conflict, he was still to go ashore at all hazards. If denied access, for instance, Rosehill was to attempt a landing under the cover of darkness on a part of the island not occupied by the Japanese. In the words of investor Thomas Fitch, put up the American flag and keep it there until it should be torn down by a superior force. A confrontation really did seem to be in the making. And hey, if this sounds interesting to you, subscribe down below, click the bell for notifications. Washington allowed onto the island 5 at a time, although it was later claimed the expedition was forced to supply 30,000 tons of guano to California annually, and was expecting a similar, so it requested the US government demand ownership of the island, along with an indemnity from Japan of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs maintained that periodic visits by bird hunters and fishermen in Washington and members of the newly established Audubon Society about roving bands of Japanese birds across the North Pacific, including on Midway and other islands of the Hawaiian group. As described by Professor William Allenson Bryan of the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii, heaps of albatross carcasses, which a crew of poachers had left to rot on the ground after the quill and chased off the previous year by a sloop of war, the USS Iroquois. By no means, workers nonetheless more than once had to drive off attempted landings by what they called bird skin pirates. This matter was soon brought to the attention of the Japanese government, and Komura later assured his counterpart in the US that he would instruct Japanese ship captains engaged in the business of destroying seabirds to not do so on any American islands. That being said, Komura did note the possibility of non-compliance, saying this class of men is largely composed of lawless adventurers. The Minami Torishima incident was one of the last stemming from the Guano Islands Act and officially ended when the US government canceled the permissions granted to Rose American. Over the following years, Mizutani submitted a request to collect guano, and Minami Torishima soon became the first island in Japan to see phosphate ore mining. The island's tiny population would also increase to roughly 50, and following a visit by Secretary Ishii, the village was transferred from Mizutani to the newly formed Minami Torishima Guano/Phosphate Ore Company, the military cruiser Takachiho. Still, many came in hopes of making a quicker. The Imperial Japanese Navy began construction of a weather station, and in 1936 the island was designated as a military outpost. It soon boasted an airfield with 2 rounds of bombardment. Representing a new phase of US combat operations against saw the first usage of new Essex-class aircraft carriers, the USS Essex and the USS Yorktown. Armed with the latest generation of naval fighters, the F-6F held defenders by surprise, and with a total of 4 airstrikes resulted in the destruction of roughly 80 in 1951, continued to conduct observations at the request of the US government on the island as part of the US Coast Guard's expansion of its Pacific network. Just a few years turning the island to Japan. The as of then still newly formed Maritime Self-Defense Force then depth behind it. You know, never judge a book by its cover, and that's really true here. Well, with all that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did. Miss out on another episode, feel free to comment, like the video, share, and I'll see you again next time.